Right, on to the next First Minister then, as we continue our look through the years. He was appointed First Minister in 2001, becoming actually the youngest office holder. He was the third First Minister in the 2.5 years of the existence of the Parliament, and in 2004 he opened the new building.
We must imagine what the future will hold. The pace of progress is quickening, and the possibilities for us are limitless. This Parliament should dare to open minds to the opportunities that change brings, and seize those opportunities for the people of Scotland. So in the words of our national poet, let us all be thinking persons. Let us all be open and adventurous. Most of all, let us be confident that we do live in a country of great talent and opportunity, of enterprise and of compassion and tolerance too. And let us indeed pick up that thread of pride and self-esteem and make our nation proud again. For we have much to be proud of.
Let's welcome Jack McConnell. Hello, sir. Have a seat. Welcome, Lord McConnell.
Welcome, welcome.
It's great to see you. Should we start with opening the building? I mean, it was a huge day. It'd been difficult, I think, getting that building there. And you had the privilege of delivering the speech in front of the Queen, it's worth saying, who was there as well, of course. What was it like? What do you remember about that day?
It had just been such a difficult issue for everybody. We had the decision had been made before the Parliament was created. Then there were all the problems with the costs running out of control. And then in the 2003 election, I felt obliged, with working with Margot Macdonald, actually, who's no longer with us, to promise an inquiry. But we had to get the building open, and George Reid, as the presiding officer for the second term, did a fantastic job over about 15 months to get us to a stage where we could open it. And I saw that as a real turning point. That was the moment when, we could perhaps move on from some of the controversies of the first 5 years and actually get on with the business. Why we were there in the first place.
Yeah. What was the atmosphere like for you picking up at that point in time? How did you set the direction of travel that you wanted to pursue as First Minister?
Well, I had two different challenges. One was in November 2001 when I took over. Mm-hmm. I was the third First Minister in 2.5 years. We'd had a difficult time. Mm-hmm. The Parliament itself, I think, was young, a bit inexperienced perhaps, having its ups and downs, good days and bad days. But it needed a bit of stability and a bit of strength to just kind of move on to the next 4 years. So I spent 18 months really doing that, because that was really important. But when we got to the 2003 election, that was kind of my opportunity to set out my own agenda. And I think I'm really proud of what we did between 2003 and 2007 in particular. I think that it was the kind of Scotland, a tolerant, diverse, enterprising, compassionate Scotland that I believed in. George Galloway once spoke about the generation of Scots who followed Scotland to the 1974 World Cup. And I was 14 at that time, and I remember that really clearly. And there was a sense of nationhood amongst that generation, whether you were left, right or centre politically, that I think we brought into Holyrood. Wendy mentioned it earlier. And I think many of us had spent our whole adult life believing in doing something in a Parliament that would create the kind of Scotland we believed in, rather than what we'd seen in the past. And I think 2003 really marked the opportunity to move on to that agenda.
Jack, just on picking up from what we just heard about coalition, it's quite interesting to think of that, because obviously that's was your experience of it as well. And looking at what we are seeing at the moment in the Scottish Government, what do you feel the key differences are? Are they as obvious as they seem? I mean, you were pretty much in tune in terms of the agenda, I guess, with Jim and the Lib Dems. Did you ever feel like they were pushing you and Labour to places you didn't want to go, in the way that a lot of SNP people feel they're being pushed by the Greens? Or was the similarity between the parties the key to making that coalition work, do you think?
Well, both parties were really committed to devolution. and that mattered because it was the early years of the Parliament, and we wanted to prove that we'd always believed in the right thing. So that was important. We had a certain set of principles that were common, but we had constant disagreements as well, on both sides. I mean, I think it's maybe quite hard to remember back now to those early years when it was possible for people inside political parties to disagree with each other without getting expelled, or to state a case on behalf of their constituents. I mean, I could mention a whole bundle of names of people that Donald Gorey in the Lib Dems, Mike Rumbles, Margot Macdonald in the SNP, even Phil Galley in the Tories, and on our benches, Malcolm Chisholm, John McCallaghan, lots of people who had opinions on things and would express them. And I think the Parliament's lost that. I don't know what's happened, but I think there's been an element. We used to be terrified by the idea that the Scottish Parliament would be Strathclyde Regional Council writ large, and that was the idea of big party groups meeting in private the day before and then just voting through what they'd agreed without any proper debate or dissent. And I think the Parliament to some extent has become that, and I think that's a much bigger problem than the state of the current coalition. A parliamentary system needs people who, as Fergus said earlier, will stand up for their constituents and stand up for the principles, even if that's against the party line. And there has to be some flexibility in the system to allow that.
So is that because the parties are more powerful, or is it because the individuals don't exist to the same degree as they used to? Do you not have the powerful individuals who will bang down your door and say, we're not having this?
I think it's both, but it's not that the parties are more powerful. I think the parties are weaker. People who don't accept dissent are weaker than people who do. So I don't think it's the parties are more powerful. I think they're more controlling, but I don't think they're more powerful. And I think also we were really fortunate in that first Parliament, because the people who populated the first Parliament were people who had been, about 75% of the people who were there had either been leading campaigners for the Parliament, personalities in their own right who'd had strong opinions over a long period of time, small number that came back from Westminster, small number who'd been council leaders, some people from the arts. There were a whole vibrancy of experience there. And I think what's happened, and I don't know why really it's happened, but I think it's really unfortunate. I think over the 25 years, that generation of people have not been replaced by people who have had similar experience outside of politics. And I think if we're looking to refresh the Parliament 25 years on, I think all the parties should be looking to attract people in who have got some life experience outside of politics.
Very interesting.
Jack, when we chatted on the... it's such a good point. And when we chatted on our podcast, you made a similar point previously. And if I was to characterise what the Labour Party are just now, and this is just my view, it's almost as if Keir Starmer's kind of scared to push the envelope a little bit further. It's very cautious, steady as she goes, and to one extent I think that's understandable, because look at the poll figures. Why would you want to push the envelope? But then you have got this Scottish election 2 years after. And when we chatted before, you thought there was a strong case to be made for further devolution, as you did as First Minister. You had that precedent of the Fresh Talent Initiative, and that was the devolution of immigration, a certain degree of immigration powers to suit the Scottish circumstance, because we do have demographic challenges. And so I suppose my question to you is, if you were to pick up the phone to Anna Sarwar now and say, listen, this is where you need to go, what would be behind the agenda for you to try and gain greater traction and to kind of tail off what Andy and you've just been discussing, enhance the Scottish Parliament's reputation?
Well, I think the whole UK needs better government, full stop. Let's take that for granted. But I think it also needs a complete change of mindset. I think it is 25 years on. There hasn't been a fundamental change in the way that central government operates in the UK over that 25 years. We still have a Chancellor who stands up on budget day and surprises his own cabinet, never mind the devolved governments, about what he's going to announce on tax. We still have a lack of respect, I would say, at the centre. We've now got, I think, a worse situation between central government and the devolved governments in terms of the experience of the civil servants in understanding that system. And so, I mean, I think you need to build in. I no longer think you can do this just by arguing for more respect and for arguing for people to be smarter with each other and to change the way they operate. I think you have to build in structural change in the same way as I think the Parliament has to change structurally. I think there's a problem with the list system. I think there's a problem with the committees in the Parliament and the way the chairs are selected. You know, I think these sort of issues, the problem with the way the Parliament engages with local government, these areas I think need structural change to deal with them. And I think you need structural changes between the UK government and the Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish governments. You should abolish the Secretaries of State, have one Secretary of State for the nations and regions that works with everybody and is responsible for making sure that Whitehall respects and works with the devolved governments and there's good relations and complementarity going on. And I think you also need a change in the House of Lords and scrap the current nonsense and replace it with a proper Senate of the nations and regions that can actually represent the whole country in London. So I think to me, we're now at a stage where it's all so broken that you need structural change and no longer just a bit of pushing and shoving to make people behave better.
Thoughts?
If I may,
We're getting some big thoughts. You've got 15 seconds.
just a
Aberdein.
quick follow-up though, but that was kind of making my point for me, Jack.
Yeah.
You've just said something really powerful there about the House of Lords and the need for a reform, and yet, you know, the Labour Party have just kind of abandoned that. They had that as one of their pledges and they just abandoned it. Perhaps we all expected that because we've been around the political game for a while, but is this not the time to seize the moment for exactly that kind of action? Is that not what the public at large want?
Doesn't stop me arguing for it.
Absolutely.
Let's reflect on a couple of moments, Jack, of your time as First Minister. We've got a couple of pictures. We've been rummaging in the scrapbooks.
This is worrying.
No, don't worry. Please don't worry. First of all, we've mentioned some of your achievements, some of the moments. Here is the G8 summit at Glen Eagles. You can see them in front of you here, look. This was a huge moment.
Who's this young guy?
Who's that young guy? Well, there you are there, look, you're welcoming George Bush. George and Laura Bush over there. And there's, that's Vladimir Putin.
Jack, that photo with Vladimir Putin was taken 3 weeks ago. So what was the crack there?
The other thing to point out, obviously, in these pictures.
If Vladimir Putin met me now, he'd probably throw me out a window.
Obviously,
and we have our newsline.
Yeah, exactly. Looking around at these photos, obviously the security operation was huge. That was something that was, considered a lot of the time. Up at the top there's a picture of a protest that ended up in the chamber at Holyrood beside you, from I think the Socialists, saying "Defend democracy" is the sign they're holding up. I mean, this is a huge moment for Scotland and indeed for you. But in the sort of narrative of devolution, how does it fit?
Well, it was a great moment for us. It was a year after the building opened, for example. So there was a chance to really make our mark. There was a lot of international interest in Scotland at that time. We were getting, for example, Antonio Guterres, who's the current Secretary General of the UN, was then Prime Minister of Poland. He's the first person I met in Butte House after I became First Minister. There's a real interest everywhere in people coming to see us. But here was the most powerful group of leaders in the world coming to Scotland to do something good in terms of make poverty history. And however, we might comment on what's happened in the 19 years since, but at the time it was really powerful, and it was a chance for us to be not side by side by the UK, but to support that effort, which I think was really important. I think there were times when it was right for the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government to challenge the UK Government. There's times when it was right for us to work with them. And in this area, we could be complementary to their efforts. And it was quite a remarkable moment. I have some great stories from
how did you get on with George Bush?
48 hours, as you can imagine.
How did you get on with George Bush?
Surprisingly well.
Yeah.
I didn't expect to. I hadn't met him. I had met Putin before, but I hadn't met Bush. I never did any TV shows for him or anything like that. I I actually met Putin just after the Americans got into Baghdad in Iraq in 2003.
Wow.
And I asked Putin how that changed the balance of power in the Middle East.
Wow.
Thinking he would be a little bit down about it. I mean, for obvious reasons, the Americans had just kind of made a big intervention, which appeared to be quite successful, and he smiled at me. And he said, when America's unpopular, it's very good for Russia.
Wow.
It's a chilling moment.
Something else to mention,
I've never forgotten.
That's been mentioned already tonight, but I want to talk about it with you, is the smoking ban. Here's you with a giant cigarette. As part of the campaign.
And the prop.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Sorry, Andy.
But I mean, you said, I mean, this is a huge moment for devolution. When we've spoken before, and this for you, I believe I'm right in saying, expand on this for us. We've got a couple of minutes to go. This was the maturing of the Parliament, in many ways.
This was a massive moment. I mean, we'd had this. We did it well. There was a consultation beforehand led by the late Tom Maciver, who felt very passionately on the issue, prompted by a Lib Dem manifesto commitment. At the beginning of that consultation, I was a complete sceptic. I mean, people who worked closely with me will verify the fact that I was not. I thought it was an infringement of civil liberties, just went too far, couldn't really do it. I was persuaded over the year by young people that it was the thing to do. Went to Ireland. Michael Martin, who's still around in Irish politics, had been the health minister. Went to talk to him. My advisor and Douglas Campbell and I actually went over in secret the day before.
Wow.
Jeans and t-shirts into the pubs, talked to people without them knowing who I was, just to find out how people had reacted. Made up my mind. But it was also the month of the Parliament building opening. It seemed like a moment to announce something big. And so that worked well, but I think the legislation was terrific. It was well thought through. Andy Kerr did an incredible job. And I think the key things we did then were that we marketed it on a non-party basis. We didn't try and claim the credit. It was a measure for Scotland, not for the Labour First Minister or the Lib Lab coalition or anything like that. It was for Scotland. And then on the day, people went with it. And I think that proved that people in Scotland by March 2006 accepted that the Scottish Parliament could pass controversial laws that affected their lives and they would accept it. The opinions at the beginning of that debate were 50-50 in Scotland.
Yeah.
And yet on the day of the ban came in, not one person in Scotland was arrested for an incident.
Brilliant.
It was, and that was the moment I think the Parliament came of age. And a Parliament really comes of age when it can do something that's unpopular and the public accept it.
Yeah.
It's right to do that. If the smoking ban had been imposed by Westminster, can you imagine what it would have been like in Scotland? We had to do it ourselves.
I've got one final question, then we'll all take a breather and regroup. Of course, we're looking back, we're marking these moments, we're reflecting on these times. We're also looking forward. I noticed some comments from former Labour MP and Government Minister, indeed, Brian Wilson, who says devolution's been a waste of time. So I suppose by way of considering the 25 years that have been and looking ahead to the future, what would you say about that?
Well, there's a lot of talk about Donald earlier, and one of the things that Donald said that first week was that we would make mistakes, but we would make our own mistakes. And I think it's a real mistake to conflate people's opinions on what the Parliament has done and what the MSPs have done with the institution itself. As somebody said earlier on, can you imagine going back to a situation where Scotland was governed by 3 or 4 ministers appointed by the Prime Minister in London who came up to Scotland on a Friday and occasionally met people for a chat? Just absolutely ridiculous system that we replaced in 1999, and the principle of devolution inside the UK, whatever people think about maybe taking it further, the principle of devolution inside the United Kingdom, if we are in the United Kingdom, is absolutely right. People have a right to vote for MSPs that make the wrong decisions, but they also have a right to vote them out. And that's what they should do.
So not a waste of time?
Absolutely not. I mean, you look at Scotland's a mass. Somebody mentioned earlier, Jim Wallace mentioned the land reform issue.
Yeah.
In 1999, this country had a system of feudal tenure that should have been abolished early in the 20th century, not in the 21st century. They would never have found the time to do that at Westminster. We did it within the first term of the Parliament. We had a system of criminal justice in this country that was creaking at the seams, reeking with patronage. It was very controversial, underfunded, and massively out of date. We transformed it between 2003 and 2007. Westminster would never have found the time to do that. So that this Parliament and Government has changed Scotland for the better. It's not perfect. People should vote for folk they don't, should vote out folk they don't agree with, but they should never change the fact that the institution is important.
Jack McConnell. Thank you. Right, stay there for a sec. Thank you so much for watching. Press subscribe and you'll get all the best videos offering insight on Scottish politics delivered straight to your feed. Press subscribe and stick around. And if you'd like to hear our conversations in full, open up your podcast app and search for Holyrood Sources.